Do you know, I was about to explain to you how my day was going and how I arrived at sitting down here today to film this series of back-to-back reviews. Then it occurred to me I am long-winded at the best of times, and we have 4 separate off-Broadway plays to talk about. Maybe even 5. Not really, but I will explain. What if I just cut straight to the chase? Let us together attempt a briefer introduction than I have managed in any of these in years. Oh my god, hey, my name's Mickey Joe. I'm a theatre critic here on social media. I went to New York, I got back a week ago. We're about to review a series of plays off-Broadway, back-to-back. There's a lot of great stuff happening off-Broadway, including some but not all of this. Let me tell you all about it. Oh, and if you've seen these, any of these, or anything else you would like to recommend, you can do it down there. Type your thoughts and feelings. Hit send. Wasn't that fun? That was refreshing. Let's keep going. Let's keep this momentum. Do you know what I'm going to do? Here's what I'm going to do. I really mean business today. I'm about to set a 15-minute timer on my phone, so I can't speak about these for more than an hour, which I absolutely could if left to my own devices. So I plan to stop myself from doing that by using my own devices. Okie dokie. So the first of these plays which I saw was This World of Tomorrow. I was not there to review it in an official critical capacity. We were given tickets by a friend who couldn't use them anymore, and I have to say this wasn't one that had been on my radar in spite of the considerable star power, because this was down at the Shed, not only starring, of course, major movie star Tom Hanks, as well as beloved Broadway star Kelly O'Hara, but also co-written by Mr. Hanks as well, along with James Glossman. And it is, I believe, a full-length adaptation of a trio of short stories which Tom Hanks had already written, which the initial plan was to adapt into a triptych of one-act plays, and have now come together to form an almost entirely cohesive narrative, one which deals with time travel and has one foot nostalgically planted in the past, in the late 1930s in New York and a subsequent decade, and one foot curiously fixed in a slightly unsettling future. Not unsettling because it muses on anything intriguing like the impact of global warming or the destruction of civilization as we know it, but simply because it is bafflingly difficult to follow. I'm about to say a lot of very fond things about this play, but I do want to get this out of the way, because we begin with a scene which is, relatively speaking, taking place in the past, specifically at the 1939 World's Fair. If you just heard World's Fair and your ears pricked up and you thought, I might be interested in this, then if you have any kind of fondness for the World's Fair as a piece of history, you absolutely will, because that has clearly been written into the text as well. There is so much discussion of it. I felt like, even though you're not really seeing any of it, because it's a fairly visually threadbare production, it's really more about the script and these performances and the interpersonal connections happening on stage in a stylish but minimally varied set. You do feel like you are walking around with these characters and experiencing the wonder and the curiosity of the 1939 World's Fair. But we begin with that scene in the past, and we are seeing it through the eyes of characters from the relative future. After which we head to the future, and I personally undergo one of the most dizzying theatrical experiences that I have encountered in the 3 decades that I have spent on this planet, because for such an extended period of time, you have no idea what they're talking about. And I am gripping onto this thing, wishing that I hadn't trimmed my nails quite so recently in order that I might be able to grip a little bit better, finding it basically impossible to emotionally connect, but also to understand what the hell it is that they are talking about, because it's a very corporate future every time that we encounter Tom Hanks's character in this future timeline with his colleagues / friends. It is always in a professional setting. We have no sense of the life that he lives outside of this workplace, but he has perhaps jointly conceived of some sort of very exciting technology or new way of looking at things that is relevant to whatever it is that they are dealing with in the distant future. And in spite of the mounting concerns of his friends and colleagues, he is increasingly making use of new technologies which allow individuals from the future to make specific, contained trips back to individual dates within the past. Not every date is possible. They find specific sort of jumping in points, and everyone, for health reasons, has to make sure that they leave the same day. Hence how he was able to go and visit the 1939 World's Fair. And the scenes which take place in the future timeline do become easier to follow because they are increasingly about the extent to which Tom Hanks's character, Mr. Allenbury, is emotionally tethered to the past and individuals who he has encountered there, and feeling drawn back to this time far, far before his own. But that first scene, that 10-minute stretch when they're having some sort of a meeting about some sort of futuristic, technological, science fiction corporate mumbo jumbo that is designed to go over our heads. I wouldn't mind if it was a couple of sentences that we aren't expected to understand. It feels like such a long time that there's just no way of truly grasping this completely impenetrable dialogue. I found that to be so obnoxious. Perhaps it put me off a little bit, but I was won back over by the rest of the play. This is essentially it's not even a romantic comedy, it's just sort of a fond romantic story with a very nostalgic spirit and a very sort of classic sensibility. The whole thing tells the story of a man from the future who falls in love with a woman from the past, with the backdrop of their particular romantic fairy tale being a very nostalgic picture of New York, a New York newly populated by arriving immigrants working together in some of the city's fondest and most authentic diners, compelling everyone who walks through the doors that they must allow them to serve them a fantastic lunch, that it's the best in the city. As much as anything else, like so many plays on Broadway stages, it does feel a little bit like a love letter to New York, but a love letter to classic New York, as it will be remembered by the individuals who have lived there for decades. This World of Tomorrow actually feels like a couple of love letters all at once, because it speaks very fondly of the World's Fair, also of the city of New York, and it plays like the kind of an old movie that you would come across while flipping through TV channels on a Sunday afternoon, and you might sort of lazily leave on in the background and be gently charmed by. That is the best that you could hope to get, I think, from this piece of theatre. It is elevated astonishingly by the really wonderful, sentimental, sort of glistening performances of Tom Hanks and Kelly O'Hara, as you might expect. And he is fantastic in it, in this challenging central role, the emotional journey of which I think would be scarcely communicated if it weren't for how meaningfully he was playing the whole thing. I think there's not really enough in the material to clue us into why he is increasingly putting himself in danger and taking this risk in order to see this woman who he briefly met again and again and again. But Tom Hanks is able to tell us so much of a story simply through his eyes, simply through an inflection. We know him to be an incredibly gifted storyteller, and I'm pleased to say, seeing him for the very first time on stage, that he can do that storytelling in a theatrical context as well. That being said, I don't want to suggest he was eclipsed by Kelly O'Hara, because she is sort of set up by the thrust of the narrative to be a little more luminous. I mean, he falls almost instantly in love with her. It stands to reason that the audience be situated to do the same thing, but you recall instantly why she is such a celebrated actress, and predominantly known for musical theatre. She is not singing in this. She is, regardless, just astonishing. There is this beautiful quality of humanity that she brings to the stage with her like a trusted handbag. The way that she is able to play the same repeated scene, moved in slightly different directions by his interference on different occasions, meeting them a little earlier in the day, a little later in the day, saying something slightly differently. The way she is able to bring such a consistent honesty to this very repetitive first entrance that she has is really miraculous. The play's been directed by Kenny Leon, and he brings fairly little to the stage that would get in between the connection of these two, that would draw us away from their performances or get in between them. So much of it is just about, if not a character study, then about this relationship that for much of the middle of the thing is actually a fascinating trio, because Kelly O'Hara's character is joined at the World's Fair by her niece, an endlessly talkative and rather ambitious young lady named Virginia, played by the brilliant Kaylee Carter. And on one side of you have Tom Hanks. On the other side of you have Kelly O'Hara. There's multiple awards flying around both of their heads in the space just above you on the stage. And she manages to be, you know, we overuse scene stealer, but she is absolutely fantastic. She is compelling and vital and energetic in a play which, without her, you know, with just these two and simply Tom Hanks going and finding Kelly O'Hara again and again and again on the same day at the World's Fair, I think would run the risk of getting a little bit sleepy. Ostensibly, there's not that much that she adds to their narrative other than perhaps inspiring hope for the future, one which they all joke that they have seen after they go into one particular alleged future-telling attraction at the World's Fair, and one which he is actually travelling from. But she's absolutely fantastic, clearly a gifted young actor on the rise. J.O. Sanders is also wonderful, deeply heartwarming as Kostas. He is the Greek chef of the diner that we begin to see more and more of in the later scenes of the second act, who will reluctantly hire anyone who is sent to him with the instruction that he will take care of them upon their arrival to New York and give them a job. He is the kind of character who reminds you of the best of New York and its people, and it's lovely to see that on stage, and he plays it really wonderfully. I have 18 seconds left to tell you about this play. I enjoyed it. It's charming. There's a lot for you to appreciate about it. It's a steady way to enjoy a couple of hours at the theatre. It isn't necessarily life-changing. The best thing about it is the way in which it allows you to glance backwards at a very fondly nostalgic past. The worst thing is the future which it suggests. If the future is anything like the one which we experience in this world of tomorrow, I want nothing to do with it. Now, I'm going through these chronologically, and as a very brief interlude, which I'm not officially going to review, but I do want to tell you about, I was invited to go and see Gruesome Playground Injuries at the Lucille Lortel Theatre. This is running for 8 weeks only from November 7th through December 28th. It is a two-hander starring Nicholas Brown and Cara Young, who I have seen giving fantastic performances in so many plays, almost all of them these sort of intensely comic supporting roles. In this, it is very much a leading performance, one with considerably more emotional heft than I have seen her have the chance to give before, and one which goes to some considerably more dark and intense psychological places. I was not familiar with this play beforehand. I know a lot of people are. I've jokingly heard it referred to as The Last 5 Years, but for plays. And it's based around a series of encounters between these two whose souls seem sort of inherently connected as they go through turbulent parallel existences, having met as children, having leaned on each other, having experienced a lot separately and then together again. I saw this so early in previews that I'm not really inclined to review it. I do want to tell you a little bit about what it's like, though, should you be interested in going to see it for yourself. It's been written by Rajiv Joseph, and what I thought was so interesting, in and amongst so many different plays about a couple, a man and a woman, and different conversations that they have over their lifetime. Maybe it's non-linear as well, which this also is, so a little bit of the constellations about it, although all taking place in the same timeline. What was really interesting and sets this one apart is the framing device, because per the title, which I initially thought was a metaphor, and it turns out absolutely not, each time they meet, one or both of them has sustained some sort of an injury, initially on the playground, and thereafter, I guess, just on the playground of life. The staging is fairly minimal. The transitions between the scenes in which they, in real time, get changed from one outfit to another, and perhaps they age, and then apply the aftermath of whatever injury it is that they have sustained in this particular moment for this particular scene. Those run on a little long, but the overall thing I do think is quite compelling as you eventually sort of encircle the real nature of their relationship and what it is that they truly mean to each other. The performances are both really great. There's several scenes where Nicholas Brown really impressed me. Go and check this out at the Lucille Lortel Theatre if you're looking for some compelling acting in an interesting play. And speaking of interesting plays, can I even show you the front of this? I'm going to, but if I'm speaking to any young viewers or listeners at this time, then I do need to point out to you that you probably shouldn't be listening to anything about this production anyway, because it's not one that you would, in any case, be able to go and see. This is, and I'm not going to say the title, not because I don't think they get to call themselves this, but just because I don't care for it all that much. Prince F is what people have been calling it, off-Broadway at Studio Seaview. Though it originated elsewhere, it has transferred. It has been this huge off-Broadway success for a decent part of the year, written by Jordan Tannehill, directed by Shyok Misha Chowdhury. Okay, so this play, inspired by something that has now perhaps become a popular and trendy meme separately, in which queer people are finding photos of themselves from childhood and retroactively seeing indications that they were clearly always going to be queer, also situates itself in the near future, where it reckons with the possibility of the current Prince George having grown up to be homosexual, a gay royal, an out gay royal, and in this play, a really out gay royal, a practicing out gay royal. And if any conversation has arisen thus far over in New York about the morality of speculating about the sexuality of an actual human being who is, I believe at the time of recording this, still a young child. I don't know how old he is at this point. How old is Prince George? Well, he seems to be 12. If that conversation has happened, I haven't heard it. I do think that the reception to the play and the way that it's being seen by predominantly American audiences is fairly separated from the British understanding of the monarchy by way of the Atlantic Ocean. I don't think this could ever really transfer to a British theatre. It would have a considerably more seismic impact if it did, and it would certainly create conversation. What immediately interested me about this isn't the first piece of media to have been inspired by the notion that maybe Prince George, whose sassy facial expressions have been captured in a series of viral photos, might go on to be gay, or may indeed already be. I think the comedy writer Gary Janetti, after a series of popular Instagram posts, actually developed a short-lived cartoon around the same idea, but it was a little less this and a little more Family Guy, that saw Prince George as a kind of a Stewie from Family Guy character. That's not who he is in this, portrayed by John McCrae, who was the original West End Jamie, whom everybody was talking about. You remember him well. This George has come of age and is in a serious relationship with a young man who he is about to introduce to his family. In particular, his immediate family, who, as far as we are concerned in the action of the play, consists of his father William, his mother Kate, and his sister. What is his sister's name? Oh, I am British. I live here. Why don't I remember? Charlotte. She's Charlotte. Louis doesn't appear. They make reference to it at one point, and I don't know that there's that much he would really contribute to the narrative. We are also limited to the 6 actors who make up this fascinating ensemble. What is much more interesting than the actual sort of soap opera events of the royal family plot is everything that's happening outside of that. We get this thorough explanation of the framing device, and then we have these beautiful and meaningful asides in turn from each of the performers who make up this company, which I believe are partially devised in some instances, with others being written by Jordan Tannehill, the playwright. Some of them feel so strikingly personal, as they overtly contemplate their own connection to perhaps the royal family, to the scene which they just played on stage, to even being on stage, to their existence and identity and career and legacy as a queer individual, perhaps as a trans individual. The performer David Greenspan has a particularly affecting monologue in which he talks about kink and different sexual fetishes, and the way in which they are now perhaps misunderstood, and the notion that some of these arose from the AIDS crisis and became means of consummating relationships and encounters and feeling connected to one another in the most literal romantic sense without endangering each other or yourselves. to put this a little bit more literally, and I really do pray that young ears aren't listening to this right now, he was talking about things that one might do with one's hand and forearm if one's hand were to be in a fist. Another really moving and dramatically satisfying monologue comes right at the end. This is performed by Naomi Allure-Stewart, who is talking about ballroom culture, and who is talking in the context of not feeling particularly connected to the British royal family, about the power and majesty of a culture, a subculture, in which queer people crown each other and give each other regal titles and call each other queens. The delivery of which I thought was so impactful. There's a tiny little moment of sisterhood and kinship between Naomi and Rachel Crowell, another of the performers on stage, who I thought was just brilliant, particularly in the scenes playing Kate. And it leads towards us closing out the thing with a little bit of Vogue choreography, which felt to me like the queer contemporary answer to the jigs that used to end Shakespearean plays. I don't know if that was the direct intention, but that's what that spoke to me about. I found all of that and all of the framing outside of this and all of the consideration of why are we telling this story on stage and what does this mean to each of us to be way more interesting than the story that we were actually telling. Because for the most part, as a queer British person who is alive right now in this particular moment for the royal family, one that feels in many ways like a significant moment of social transition, I do feel as though there was an awful lot that I wanted this to tackle in terms of the implications within the family and within the country of the second in line to the throne being gay, being openly gay, having a male partner, the concept of him one day becoming king and marrying a man. And yet, in spite of all of the implications of this, all we really did was kind of delivered an episode of The Crown, or a couple episodes of The Crown, but gender flipped. There was conversation around the queerness of it all, of course, but I don't know that we really felt the impact of that as much as just, doing a gay version of the kind of royal drama that we've all seen played out before, or I have at least. Now, this is one of a couple of plays I saw in New York where the audience are expected to volunteer their phones into yonder pouches to be sealed for the duration of the performance, because over the course of the one-act runtime, there are several moments of total exposing nudity, often as part of portrayals of amorous encounters or entire sexual fetishes. There's a moment where one of the transitions in David Zinn's beautiful set reveals John McCrae as George entirely nude and suspended via various ropes, and there's some interesting conversation, I grant you, around the origins of that particular inclination for him and how he feels about power given his position in the royal family, by extension his position in the country. I think that's all really interesting, and you could almost have done a very interesting play with simply George and his boyfriend talking about all of this, and perhaps with his father as well. I think the addition of Charlotte and the addition of Catherine expanded it so as to include the perspectives, very importantly so, of more different performers. I don't know that it necessarily served the story within all of that. I also don't know that it felt particularly authentically like a queer British royal story. If you're going to this play for that, I don't know that's what you get, but this play offers, alongside all of the kinky graphic nudity, if that's why you're going to see this play, a really interesting, utterly contemporary queer perspective on itself, which I really liked. So, not necessarily the meteoric impact that I was expecting this to have given how it had been talked about, but I'm very glad that I saw it. There was an awful lot to enjoy and think about. And let's keep that energy going, tiny people in my camera, for the next play that I saw. This was at MCC Theatre right towards the end of its run, but I am so glad that I did. One of the best things that I saw throughout my entire trip. This was a new play called Caroline. It was in the smaller space at MCC, my first time within that auditorium. This has been written by Preston Max Allen, and it is a three-person play starring Amy Landecker, River Leip Smith, and Chloe Grace Moretz, all three giving really fantastic, grounded, real, authentic, emotionally vulnerable performances as a grandmother, mother, and daughter. This intergenerational dialogue, which is something I've been really really enjoying on stage a lot recently. I find it so satisfying. It reminded me a little bit of the play We Had a World, the Joshua Harmon play that I saw earlier this year at New York City Centre, but dealt with entirely different themes and entirely different relationships, but likewise depicted the strong bond between a mother and child and the sort of strained relationship between that mother and her mother, and the child coming to understand that through their own relationship with their grandmother. This being something that happens basically in both of those plays. We Had a World, though, was more of a memory play. It was more of a reflection, and this is hurtling through real time, with a real tangible urgency conveyed to us in the first few scenes, because Caroline is the daughter of a young woman named Maddie who left her parents' home and the relationship that she had with them after several fraught years of adolescent substance abuse, addiction, and recovery. In the years which have passed, she has become clean and sober. She has also become a parent to a young daughter named Caroline, with whom she is, at the beginning of the play, fleeing from the state in which they live. This because it is no longer safe for Caroline to live there, the reality of which we can perceive due to the fact that Caroline's arm is in a cast. And we can infer it as well from the immediately fantastic acting of Chloe Grace Moretz, who is simply trying to balance the needs of this child as well as the wants of this child, and what it is that she wants for breakfast at the diner that they've stopped at, and what she's going to say to her mother when they eventually get back to her parents, whose home she is travelling towards with her, how she can prepare her daughter for what the situation will be like emotionally when they arrive, how much she wants to tell her about her previous life, what she wants their relationship to be, what is best for her daughter, these becoming the big questions that she will have to reckon with later on in the play. Much of which, I should point out, is catalysed by one of the play's major themes and ideas, which is the fact that Caroline, her daughter, is actually trans, with Caroline being the name that she has chosen for herself. I think she actually chooses it for herself during the events of the play. She is entirely supported by her mother in this transition, and refreshingly also by her grandmother, who has no problem with it when it is eventually explained to her. This because trans playwright Preston Max Allen explicitly, I believe, wanted to tell a different kind of a story about trans youth, which is something I so enormously respect. As a teacher for several years, the majority of trans human beings who I have come into contact with and known have been trans young people, the lives and challenges and personalities of whom I don't see reflected, I have never seen reflected in the extensive debate which is had about their increasingly vilified and politicized existences. But stepping off of my soapbox for just a minute, I was so grateful to get the chance to see this play, which speaks honestly and authentically about what that experience can look like through the eyes of a supportive, if desperate for their own reasons, parent. And if much of the early conversation of the play concerns that idea, it does become sort of moot by the time we get to where we are going, especially once Caroline's wealthy suburban grandmother has confirmed that that isn't going to be any kind of a problem for her or her husband. Instead, what we find ourselves stepping into as Lee Jelinek's brilliant set metamorphosizes into this very comfortable home is an unendingly tense headbutt of a reunion between mother and daughter, as this grandmother character is visibly reluctant to emotionally welcome her estranged daughter back into her home. She is eager to forge a relationship with the granddaughter whose existence she has just found out about, but after years of trauma, we can actually watch as she struggles and ultimately fails to navigate all of the damage and the hurt and the disbelief that is blocking her from understanding and believing her daughter as she tells her what her life is now like. As she tells her that she has taken responsibility for herself, that she is remorseful, and as she tells her interesting realities about how she came to experience addiction and substance abuse in the first place, and about how drugs were circulated within this affluent neighborhood, all of which is rooted in very real, interesting statistics. It's a tribute both to the writing and to the direction by David Cromer that there are such gasp-inducing moments in these conversations. The play begins by really meaningfully endearing us to the relationship between mother and daughter before transitioning us into an examination of another mother-daughter relationship later in life and entirely different. One which we think might perhaps be salvageable with the capacity to really surprise us. And the greatest triumph of the play is absolutely the performances. Chloe Grace Moretz is fantastic, is brilliant on stage, absolutely wonderful, needs to act more. I think they should take this entire play to Broadway and she should go and win a bunch of awards for it because she was remarkable. The extent of compassion and indefatigable determination as she is caring for her daughter from one state to the next, all while trying to emotionally and physically protect her on this journey, one that she is visibly reluctant to make in the first place, and then the extent to which she is willing to self-sacrifice by the end, the emotional journey that she goes on, the emotions unearthed in her by this challenging encounter with her mother, portrayed by Amy Landecker, who also just remarkable, really fantastic, so guarded from her first arrival as this character, with so much unsaid, so much visibly lingering beneath the surface that eventually unveils itself in a way that is staggering, in a way that will actually make your jaw drop, and in a way that feels perhaps simultaneously indefensible but also understandable. I'm sure there are audience members at multiple stages of life who feel very differently about this character and who are empowered to feel that way through the sheer authenticity and uncompromising, unflinching honesty of this performance. I dare say there are parents, grandparents who understand and respect and know the challenges that have brought this character to the position that she arrives in by the end of the play. Then we have River Leip-Smith, who is a revelation, an incredibly talented young performer, dealing with some of the most emotionally intelligent dialogue that I have ever heard a young performer tasked with in a play. The bond with Chloe Grace Moretz's character is so earned, but also the fatigue of travel and the sort of slight disinterest and boredom of early teenage years as well, and that particular turning point of adolescence. Again, just really honestly played. This play, I'm not sure that it would work as well as it does if it wasn't for such a level of authenticity. And River, through often inquisitive dialogue, made us laugh, ultimately warmed our hearts plenty. An absolutely astonishing trio of performers in a brilliantly written play. I desperately hope that Caroline gets some kind of a further life, ideally this production and this cast. Which brings us to the play that defies the little 15-minute rule I have placed on myself here, not just because there is so much I want to tell you about it, but also because this play itself is more than 5 hours long. I say more than because it ran for 5 hours and 20 minutes when I saw it a couple of weeks ago, including, admittedly, 2 intermissions. But Americans, we need to have a conversation about this because these are 10-minute intermissions. No, I lied. 15-minute intermissions. But we do 20 minutes here in the UK. In Germany, they do 25. We can have a conversation about this, but I'm already eating into my time. And I so eagerly have been waiting to tell you about Initiative. Now, so much of the conversation around this play has been about its extended runtime. I want to move past that for just a moment and tell you what it actually depicts, which is a handful of young middle school and high school students around the year 2000, Y2K era California, coming to terms with their own identities, their own relationships, their own existences, and what aspirations they can build for themselves in an America that is very quickly shifting. The events of the play guide us through the first couple of years of the new millennium, during which a lot happens politically in the US. And over the 3 acts, our characters age a few years, essentially to encapsulate their high school experience, more or less. It is thus an epic turn of the millennium coming-of-age story like no other. The real success of the extent of the thing and the duration of this play is that it feels a lot like a book. It feels like a young adult story that has been fully and entirely staged with no revisions and no cuts, in the same way that when Gats was performed on stages around the world, which is a play in which the Great Gatsby novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald is simply read aloud on stage by different performers. It takes an awfully long time to do that. If you want to fully stage an entire narrative and excise no moment whatsoever, if you want to retain the entire thing, you need an awful lot of time in order to be able to do that. And what we gain from that is so many different layers of meaning in the relationships which are established. There are things that you could simply tell us that instead we know about because we've experienced. We don't need to do any kind of heavy-handed exposition. There's no scene where two characters are talking about a third person and say, oh, well, let me tell you about this thing that happened last summer, because we saw that already in the prologue. We have watched and observed as every formative experience has happened to this handful of characters that shapes the friendships, the relationships, the dynamics, their dreams, their disasters, their feuds, their fallouts, their reunions, their separations, their romances, their breakups. It has all been built so carefully and so steadily that it all feels entirely genuine. And in this entirely naturalistic way, characters so rarely have to articulate how they feel about something because it's all implicit. We understand how she feels about the return of this character when he walks into the room because we remember what happened a couple of acts ago between them a few years ago for them at school. Now, it is set entirely in the Y2K era. There are several creative choices that remind us of that. We hear a dial-up modem sound. We also have a young character screaming at their offstage mother about how she can't use the phone yet because he's still using the computer. We have online messaging. It's AIM, and we are seeing text speak, sometimes said aloud on stage, sometimes projected. The use of projections and text speak in this is so brilliant, but also just the way that it's styled as well, where we learn to accept where it's going to appear and that it's going to appear quite flatly, and then we see it again, but it's different phrases and words circulating and spinning around when that character's world is entering a state of dizzying turmoil. All these choices allow us to so brilliantly reach inside of the minds of each of these characters. Mikiko Suzuki McAdams is the scenic designer, Emma Rose Went is the director overseeing all of these creative choices, and S. Katie Tucker is the projection designer. I particularly loved those. I thought it was really brilliant. There was a moment of glorious direction when one character was relating to a friend about a circumstance that had just happened to her. We see the action building towards this, and then we cut to later, and we, the audience, don't know what has gone down until she is trying to explain it to her friend, and the way that she is forced to physically relive this traumatizing event as a means of theatrically explaining it to him is so brilliant and so upsetting. I want to talk a little bit about the title of the play, because some of you may have heard Initiative and thought, oh, Dungeons and Dragons, and you would not be mistaken. This is a world that we begin to engage with during the second of the play's 3 acts. The first is a slightly familiar queer young coming-of-age story in which two characters may seem like they are on a trajectory moving towards each other, but then there is perhaps an emotional betrayal that takes place as they each begin to want different things and shape themselves into different people, over the course of which there is a surprising amount of nudity. By the second act, a community of individuals has taken shape within this narrative, and they together are tentatively beginning to play Dungeons and Dragons and beginning to figure out how that might work, as one character takes on the role of Dungeon Master and builds this world for them. For those of you who don't know, for the uninitiated, Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game which utilizes dice and an awful lot of statistics and data, but it's one in which you sort of participate in a jointly created imaginary world as your character, a character who you have devised. And initiative is a term that comes from Dungeons and Dragons. It's basically whenever you immediately enter into a combat scenario, which will then be turn-based, As in, you get to slash with the sword, you get to cast a magic spell, you get to move over here, you get to try not to die. Initiative is something you will be invited to roll when that begins, and it's like any other board game situation. The highest roll will be the person who gets to go first, and then it will progress through an order based on how everyone rolled when they rolled initiative. The thing that I found a little bit surprising is that, unless I missed it, and there was an awful lot of play here, so it's entirely possible, I don't recall anyone ever actually being asked to roll initiative, and the way that they dealt with those combat scenarios was a lot more freeform, and I understand that entirely from a theatrical context. I have gone to an off-Broadway show before where I watched people literally play Dungeons and Dragons in a true and rule-inclusive sense, and that still worked for me, but I also understand extrapolating it to a more staged version of the world that they are creating, where we're not actually seeing them play Dungeons and Dragons. What we're seeing is the version of it, or we're seeing some hybrid between the real world and the world that they are imagining jointly. In fact, I'm not even sure that you hear the word initiative ever mentioned within the play, but I suppose the reason why it's the title here is not just because we move through the focus of several different characters. It seems like we're going to have one protagonist at the beginning who sort of comes back to us, but in the interim, we switch our focus to a couple of different people, some of whom arrive feeling like they're going to be incidental side characters and then emerge to be very substantial protagonists. But also just the idea of rolling initiative means like beginning and making a choice and striking out. And for all of these people in high school, increasingly a little nervous and uncertain about entering the world and beginning these big lives which are ahead of them, the very idea of, metaphorically speaking, rolling initiative for themselves is what they spend much of the play trying to figure out how to do. Now, absolutely nobody asked, but I saw an awful lot of my own adolescence in these characters, in this setting, weirdly, and in some of the events of this play. Not because they were playing D&D, I actually didn't discover that until adulthood, and not just because of the scene where they're getting drunk on the beach, although been there. But I think just because this particular voice, this frustrated, disenfranchised, existential, adolescent voice, feels to me like it's never been so truthfully captured and conveyed on stage before. The whole thing plays out like something of a collision between The Perks of Being a Wallflower and Dead Poets Society a little bit. It has something of those to it, but also because it's so substantial, because it invites us to spend so long in its world, is entirely a thing with its own identity. We get to know these characters so well. We have watched them steadily and realistically grow up rather than being catapulted through the hasty events of a play. On the one hand, you can watch this and feel like maybe every piece of drama needs to be 5 hours long. On the other hand, you do feel like this is an early career playwright who is getting drunk off the thrill of getting to expand as much as possible on all of this backstory, on all of the development, on all of these characters, and just slowly and steadily bringing them into each other's orbit and nudging them onto a different track slightly, and watching the results of that really gradually and in a very lifelike way take place. Also, it'd be remiss of me not to highlight some of the fantastic performances within this company, in particular Olivia Rose Baresi as Clara, so brilliant, Greg Quellar as Riley, Christopher Dillon White as M, and Andrea Lopez Alvarez as Kendall. The D&D nerd inside of me says that there probably weren't enough dice rolls. The theatre critic inside me says you could probably cut 40 minutes out of the play and barely even notice, but the theatre lover that is all of me really enjoyed this at the public. Once again, I hope this has a future life. More than anything else, I hope the audience like me and younger than me who will see themselves reflected in this are able to find it. One particular line that really resonated with me, which I wrote down and would like to share with you now: "We're meant to shape tomorrow, but nobody will explain yesterday." Which finally brings me to the end of this roundup of 4 of the plays that I saw in New York off-Broadway last month. Terrific theatre happening off-Broadway right now. I heard great things about Practice at Playwrights Horizons. Didn't get the chance to see it. Ran out of show slots. Some of these plays were 5 hours long. That's how that happens. Didn't get the chance to see, is it Meet the Cartosians? I'm hearing great things about so many pieces of theatre. There will be plenty more as we head into 2026. There is always great work to see off-Broadway is the point of all of this. I hope that there is future life for many of these so that more audience members get the chance to see them and so that I can be one of those audience members. Thank you for listening to my thoughts on all of these pieces of theatre. If you have had the chance so far to see any of these, please let me know what you thought of them in the comments section down below. Let all of us know. And if you enjoyed listening to my reviews and you would like to hear more of what I have to say about various shows that I see around the world, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel or go follow me on podcast platforms. In the meantime, as always, I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!